Welcome to Class 4 of Blueprint for Liberty. This session is titled Debunking Excuses for Unlimited Power, Part 2. In our last session, we pulled the curtain back on two of the federal government's favorite get-out-of-jail-free cards, the Supremacy Clause and the General Welfare Clause. We saw how both have been twisted beyond recognition, warped into weapons used to justify nearly every unconstitutional expansion of federal power, from cradle-to-grave welfare programs to federal control over speech, education, healthcare, firearms, and so much more. Today, we move into the second half of the federal government's favorite excuses. We'll tackle excuses 3, 4, and 5. Starting with a clause that's been bent and stretched so far from its original meaning that it's earned a nickname, the Elastic Clause, better known as the Necessary and Proper Clause. Now, the Necessary and Proper Clause is a favorite toy of big government types. They love to twist it into a blank check, pretending it gives Congress the power to do whatever it deems necessary to achieve whatever goals it sets for itself. Here's how they typically quote it. The Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. Sounds broad, right? Almost limitless. But that's the trick. They're only quoting the first half. It's a cherry-picked half-truth. And as I've said before, half-truths are the devil's tools. Let's read the whole clause in its full and proper context from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. The Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or office thereof. There's the truth. For carrying into execution the foregoing powers. Not whatever Congress dreams up, not every modern impulse or agenda item, just what is necessary and proper to execute the enumerated powers already listed above it in Article 1, Section 8. And let's not forget the words of James Madison, the father of the Constitution, who made it crystal clear in the Federalist number 45. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. That's the standard. That's the measuring stick. Not what's convenient or politically popular or what some bureaucrat says is necessary. This clause is not a license, it's a lever. It's a tool of implementation, not authorization. If the power isn't already granted to Congress in the Constitution, then Congress has no business passing laws about it, period. So, the next time a politician, lawyer, or law professor waves around the Necessary and Proper Clause to justify some bloated federal agency or program, ask them a simple question. Which enumerated power is that law carrying into execution? If they can't answer, it's unconstitutional. And if they won't answer, it's probably because they know it. Next up on the list of excuses is one that's been used to justify federal control over nearly every aspect of your life. From what kind of toilet you can install to what kind of car you're allowed to drive. I'm talking about the Interstate Commerce Clause found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. It says, the Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. There are three distinct categories: foreign nations, among the several states, with Indian tribes. It's that second one, and among the several states, that has been twisted and expanded beyond recognition. From those 5 words, the federal government now claims the power to regulate farming, manufacturing, medicine, firearms, education, and more. How did we get here? Let's go back to the New Deal era. In 1938, during the Great Depression, Congress passed the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which micromanaged what farmers could grow, how much, and when. It even paid farmers to kill livestock and destroy crops in the middle of widespread hunger. Enter Roscoe Filburn, a farmer in Ohio. He grew more wheat than the federal law allowed, not to sell, but to feed his own animals on his own land with his own labor for his own use. For that, he was fined. Filburn pushed back and sued the government. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court in 1942 under the name Wickard versus Filburn. The court ruled against him. Their logic? Even though the wheat never left his farm, it affected the supply and demand of wheat in interstate commerce. Therefore, Congress could regulate it. Let that sink in. Not participating in commerce was ruled to be commerce. By that logic, there is nothing the federal government cannot regulate. Under that ruling, which the Supreme Court has never overturned, if you choose to grow your own tomatoes in your backyard, as opposed to buying them from your local supermarket, that would affect interstate commerce, and Congress could literally regulate your own backyard. Let's go back to Madison's test. Is this a few and defined power, or is this a boundless field of power? It's not even close. It's a legalized land grab. Or say you and your spouse wanted to have children. That would also affect interstate commerce, according to the Supreme Court, which would give Congress the power to regulate how many children you can have or whether you can have any at all. In fact, some totalitarian-controlled countries have already gone this far. Look no further than communist China. Now, what did the founders actually mean by commerce? In the 1824 Supreme Court decision Gibbons versus Ogden, Chief Justice John Marshall wrote, "Commerce, undoubtedly, is traffic, but it is something more. It is intercourse. It describes the commercial intercourse between nations and parts of nations in all its branches, and is regulated by prescribing rules for carrying on that intercourse. All America understands and has uniformly understood the word commerce to comprehend navigation." Chief Justice Marshall then goes on to explain what the few and defined powers of the Interstate Commerce Clause are relative to the meaning of the word commerce. He wrote, "The word used in the Constitution, then, comprehends and has been always understood to comprehend navigation within its meaning. And a power to regulate navigation is as expressly granted as if that term had been added to the word commerce. And if the word commerce is understood to also refer to navigation," Chief Justice Marshall wrote, "if this be the admitted meaning of the word in its application to foreign nations, it must carry the same meaning throughout the sentence and remain a unit, unless there be some plain, intelligible cause which alters it." In other words, commerce among the states means the same thing as commerce with foreign nations: buying, selling, trading, and navigation. Not manufacturing, not agriculture, and certainly not a man feeding wheat to his own pigs. And if you need more clarity, turn to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 5. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. Congress can't even tax trade between the states, let alone prohibit it or control it. That's because the Commerce Clause was designed to prevent trade barriers, not create federal control over every aspect of American life. President James Monroe, in an address to Congress in 1822, said, "A power, then, to impose such duties and imposts in regard to foreign nations and to prevent any on the trade between the states was the only power granted." That's all. The Commerce Clause wasn't meant to be a leash for Congress to wrap around the neck of the nation. It was a barrier, a constitutional checkpoint to keep states from warring economically with each other. Now, we come to the final excuse, treaty law. First, we must ask ourselves, what is a treaty? Black's Law Dictionary defines it as treaty, a formally signed and ratified agreement between two nations or sovereigns. International agreement concluded between two or more states in written form and governed by international law. Simply put, it's an agreement between two or more nations that is subject to the laws of the ratifying countries. It's important that we distinguish between treaty law and the treaty clause. What's the difference, you ask? Treaty law is actually part of the Supremacy Clause found in Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, specifically the part that says, "This Constitution and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land." On the other hand, the Treaty Clause is the provision found in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution that empowers the President of the United States to make treaties with the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate. It reads, "He, the President, shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur." Treaty law refers to the legal power of treaties, and the treaty clause refers to the power of making treaties. Some claim that if the President signs a treaty and 2/3 of the Senate ratifies it, that treaty becomes supreme law, even if it contradicts the Constitution. That's false and dangerous. Let's read Article 6, the Supremacy Clause, again, this time paying attention to what the federal government often wants you to skip. "This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land." Key phrase, under the authority of the United States. What's that authority? The authority of the United States refers to the Constitution. As you can see, this wording differs from earlier where it says, "made in pursuance thereof." So why did the framers of the Constitution not just simply say, "This Constitution and all treaties made or which shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land"? When Article 6 was drafted in Philadelphia in 1787, the United States, in Congress assembled, had already approved of various treaties. These treaties were not made under the authority of the Constitution, but under the authority of the Articles of Confederation. And rather than striking down those treaties, the framers sought to uphold them. The treaties made under the Articles of Confederation were made under the authority of the United States. This wording recognizes the authority of the Articles of Confederation for existing treaties and the authority of the Constitution for all new treaties. All treaties made after the Constitution was adopted must comply with the new authority, the Constitution. Treaties are only valid if they conform to it. The President and the Senate cannot change the Constitution with a foreign signature and a ratification vote. In a letter to Edmund Pendleton, James Madison made it clear that the Constitution limits the power of treaties to become the supreme law of the land. Treaties, as I understand the Constitution, are made supreme over the constitutions and laws of the particular states, and like a subsequent law of the United States, over pre-existing laws of the United States, provided, however, that the treaty be within the prerogative of making treaties, which no doubt has certain limits. Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1803, "I say the same as to the opinion of those who consider the grant of the treaty-making power as boundless. If it is, then we have no Constitution." Notice how all of these powers, including the treaty-making power, are limited. Why are they limited? It is because our founding fathers knew that a power left unlimited would be abused by the person wielding that power. Montesquieu, a man read and quoted repeatedly by the founding generation, explained it this way: "Political liberty is to be found only when there is no abuse of power. But constant experience shows us that every man invested with power is apt to abuse it and to carry his authority as far as it will go." In the United States, the power of the federal government is limited by the black letter of the written Constitution, by the states who stand as barricades between federal overreach and the people, and finally, by the people themselves, who in a republic are the ultimate source of all political authority. Finally, just in case there's anyone needing a little more convincing, the U.S. Supreme Court, in its 1957 ruling Reed versus Covert, held that it would be manifestly contrary to the objectives of those who created the Constitution, as well as those who were responsible for the Bill of Rights, let alone alien to our entire constitutional history and tradition, to construe Article 6 as permitting the United States to exercise power under an international agreement without observing constitutional prohibitions. In other words, treaty power in Article 6 of the Constitution is subject to constitutional limitations. It would be completely unconstitutional and diametrically opposite of the framers' intention to allow treaties to override the Constitution and be used as an excuse for unlimited power. All treaties made by the President and with the consent of 2/3 of the Senate are subject to prohibitions of power in the Constitution. So when they try to pass gun control through a UN treaty, no. When they try to force climate mandates through international agreements, no. When they try to use a treaty to justify medical tyranny or digital ID mandates, not here, not now, not ever. But once again, the limits on the treaty-making power must be enforced or they will be ignored. And that power will be abused and our liberty will be bargained away by agreements among tyrants to enslave the people. Where do we go from here? Look around. The federal government is now involved in everything: housing, education, healthcare, energy, transportation, even wildlife. But none of that is authorized by the Constitution. Not a single one of those departments is listed in Article 1, Section 8. So when we push back and people say, but it's for a good cause, we respond with the words of George Washington in his 1796 farewell address. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation. For though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. That's the truth. Once you make an exception, you've opened the door. And once the door is open, tyranny walks in. So how do we close it? It starts with we the people, and it moves through the sovereign states. The Constitution was ratified by the states and must be enforced by the states. James Madison, in the Federalist number 44, wrote, "The members and officers of the state governments, on the contrary, will have an essential agency in giving effect to the federal Constitution. When Washington exceeds its bounds, it's the duty of the states to step in, and our job to hold them accountable. That's why we turn to nullification. Nullification is not rebellion, it's not sedition, it's not civil disobedience. It's obedience to the highest law of the land, the Constitution. Nullification is the scalpel for removing the tumor of tyranny." In the Kentucky Resolution of 1799, Thomas Jefferson wrote that the several states who formed that instrument, being sovereign and independent, have the unquestionable right to judge of its infraction, and that a nullification by those sovereignties, the states, of all unauthorized acts done under color of that instrument is the rightful remedy. And in Jefferson's previous draft of the Kentucky Resolutions from October 1798, he explained, "Every state has a natural right in cases not within the compact, causus non federis, to nullify of their own authority all assumptions of power by others within their limits. That without this right, they would be under the dominion, absolute and unlimited, of whosoever might exercise this right of judgment for them." If we leave all constitutional interpretation to the Supreme Court, then we're not living in a republic. We're living under a judicial monarchy. The answer? Elect governors who understand their oath. Elect legislators who will back them. Educate your sheriffs, your judges, your neighbors. Hold the line, because in the end, the power doesn't reside in D.C., it resides with us. This concludes Debunking Excuses for Unlimited Power, Part 2. God bless you, and God bless this fight for liberty. I'll see you next time.